Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Arwin Levinson is a Las Vegas-based landscape photographer known to capture some very compelling photography that depicts nature in its most raw and ethereal form. She's devoted her time to capturing not only perfectly timed photos of our world, but also the feeling of awe you get when you experience those moments of wonder in real time. Arwin was born in Massachusetts and studied computer science at the University of Illinois before finding herself in Las Vegas. One day on a road trip through the country to help her sister move to Los Angeles, Levinson found herself driving through the mountains in Colorado where she felt immediately inspired by nature and the views of the mountains. She picked up her first camera not long after and found herself wandering around the landscape, trying to capture as much of the land surrounding the Northwest as she could. When she moved back to Illinois, she found herself in a city with very minimal landscape opportunities, but a work trip that took her all the way to India, where she got the chance to visit the Himalayas, would rekindle her passion for photography again. We discuss how she came to see landscapes around her as her old friends that she can revisit many times over, as well as her love for capturing the unusual and astronomical events that can be seen in the northern skies, along with much, much more. I hope you enjoyed the show. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Good. I'm doing great today. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Whereabouts are you? You're in the US?
Yeah, I live in Las Vegas.
Okay. Nice and warm there recently.
Yes, we had a heat wave. Now it's back to normal temperature. Actually, at mid-September, it starts getting pretty nice into October, the temperature. So,
yeah, well, I think we're getting all your rain over here at the moment because we're about to go into our third La Nina in a row, which means the west coast of the US and South America tends to be rather dry, and the east coast of Australia tends to be rather wet. So
I see. Yeah, we've had what is it, La Nina, whatever it is,
you
that's
get La
dry
Nina
the
when we
past
get
few
La
years.
Nina and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been pretty wild here with floods and all the rest of it. Whereas you're in real bad drought and dam levels are low and all that sort of thing. So it's looking a bit weird. I think the weather recently.
Yeah, but we have had a lot of rain this summer, actually, which is kind of unusual.
Okay.
Even Death Valley National Park, which is only a couple hours away from Las Vegas, got flooded like 3 times this summer.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So why don't we start talking about photography? Because that's, I think, what people are listening for. So how did you get started? Why did you get started? What drew you to landscapes and astro?
Okay. Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try and make it concise. I have been doing it on and off for a while, actually. I grew up in the Midwest of the US, which is kind of a flat landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in college, I was a computer science major, and I had the opportunity to intern at some companies out west. So the first one was actually Microsoft. And so I was in Illinois, and I drove from Illinois to Seattle. And I chose to drive on the 70, the I-70, because it had a lot of like national parks and things like that. And so you drive pretty flat for a while, and then you hit Colorado past Denver, and the mountains just are magnificent. And so as soon as I saw them, I fell in love. And I mean, I had never seen mountains like that before. Yeah. And so that's what first kindled my interest in landscape and landscape photography. And so when I graduated from college, I moved to Portland, Oregon, because I wanted to be, around beautiful landscapes and mountains. And I got my first camera. It was my first SLR, I should say. I
Sure,
had a
sure.
point and shoot camera for a long time, but it was before digital. So I got the SLR and I tried to go every weekend and take pictures when I wasn't working. And I even took a photography class and I learned to develop my film, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was pretty into it at that point, as a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
But then life, makes changes, and I ended up moving back to the Midwest, and I kind
Sure.
of gave it up for a while.
Okay.
Um, and it was probably like 2010 or 2011, many years later. I started going to India for work. I was a software developer.
Yep.
And it was then that I decided to pick up photography again. So at that point, I got a DSLR and I tried street photography and, all different photography because I wanted to capture what I saw in
Sure,
India.
sure.
But it just didn't really click for me like
Mm.
landscape did. And so I started, every time I would go to India for work, I would take some time off as vacation time and go travel and see a different area. So finally, I went to the Himalayas,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's where my love for landscape photography was rekindled again. So ever since then, I had it as a hobby, and I would go out and take as many photos as I could. And then about 5 years ago, we moved from LA to Las Vegas. And part
Mhm.
of the agreement when we moved is that I would stop working as a software
Software developer,
developer
yeah.
and do landscape photography full time. So that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years.
Cool. That's quite the journey. So I guess there's a few things I want to chase down there. One is you mentioned when things weren't really clicking with you, and then, as you said, you went to the Himalayas and it started to click. And obviously, the Himalayas are going to give you that spectacular landscape. I guess what is it about that, and when was it that you sort of started to say, okay, this is starting to go a little bit beyond just documenting what you see and moving into, creating art as opposed to, just, okay, here's a nice picture of a nice scene, because anyone can turn up to the Himalayas and take a pretty good shot of, some spectacular scenery, but turning that into art is a different shape and form of, what you're doing. So when did that start to click for you?
Right. And for me, it's kind of the difference, I would say, between like a snapshot and
Mm-hmm.
like landscape photography that's art.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't have any photos from the Himalayas that I consider better than a snapshot because, that's when I was first getting into it
Yeah,
again.
yeah. Everyone
Um,
hates their early work.
so I think probably on my third visit, I went to this place in the Himalayas called Spiti Valley.
Hmm.
And I actually took an astrophotography workshop. And that was one of my first workshops that I had taken.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that I kind of started thinking about um, being more intentional about my photography and planning it and
Yeah.
thinking about what is it that I really want to capture in
Mm.
my photos and how can I compose it in a way that makes it a more striking photo. And so I think that was probably in like 2014.
Sure.
um, and I think at that point is when I really started thinking about, um, creating more to my photo than what I would call a snapshot.
Mm. Okay. So I guess what is it about that that really drew you to it? What are you motivated by? Is it the scenery itself, or is it that intentional desire to create some art?
Originally it was the scenery. That's what got me started. But
Hmm.
now I think it's more when I am able to plan something out and then actually go and create what I kind of had in my mind. I mean, it's not always exactly what was in my mind, but
Yep.
similar to what I'm thinking of or imagining. Um, it's just the feeling that I get when I am able to actually create that.
Mm.
I think that really inspires me and keeps me going now.
Yeah, great. So it sounds like it's important for you to kind of have goals in your photography. Is that true? And if so, what is your goal, I guess?
Right. I mean, I guess you could call it a goal.
I
I
mean,
mean,
they
I
might be
like
small
to,
goals. It might not be
right.
an end goal for everything that you do.
So what I have is I have a huge list of like places I want to get a photo that will really capture how I envision that place to be shown.
Mm.
So it in some of them are like multiple different ones from the same place, that I have in my head. But I have a big list and I keep it mostly in Gaia GPS because I put in pins and I put like the conditions and everything that I would like to capture at that
Right.
place. And whenever I'm going out to take photos, I explore new places. And then if something, inspires me, I'll add it to the list.
Mm.
So I would say that's kind of my goal, is to complete that list, which is a huge list. So I don't know if I'll ever complete it.
Yeah, I know. I
But that
know
would
I'll
be
never
my.
complete mine, but I'm going to try. So, I guess in terms of that, do you and sounds like you do a fair amount of planning. Do you look at each trip as photo that you're trying to get as a separate project, or are you trying to build a broader body of work around a theme, or do you do both? Because there's no reason why you couldn't do both.
Yeah, it's a little of both, but it's more that like when I go on a trip, I have a couple of goals, like photos that I want to get during
Yeah.
that trip. And I don't always get all of them. So then I'll have to go back and do it again. But let's say I have 3 or 4 that I have in my head that I want to get on that trip.
Mm.
Then if I get 1 or 2, it's pretty successful.
Yeah, cool, cool. So, what kind of planning goes into a trip? Obviously, the further you go, the more you got to plan. But what kind of trips are you doing? And are you trekking into backcountry? Are you sort of staying close to road and rail networks and that sort of thing? How do you sort of plan what you're doing and where you go?
Well, usually I don't go that far. I mean, I go far, but within driving distance
Sure.
normally is what I like to do. Once in a while, I'll take a longer trip. But for me, my favorite photography is mostly within the states that border Nevada. So, like, I'll go to California or Utah or Arizona or Oregon and Idaho. There's a lot of great states that border Nevada. And
Yeah.
actually, one goal for this winter is to spend more time in Nevada itself. But really, you know, 8 hours of driving, maybe 14 if it's a longer trip, then I'm going to Oregon.
Mm.
Um, I'm sorry, we need to start this over. Can
That's
you
okay.
repeat the question? I completely forgot the question.
Sure. Um, I'm just trying to remember what it is. What I might do is just reset. What were
I'm
we talking about?
sorry, I
No, no,
totally
no, no.
lost
It's
my
totally
train of
fine.
thought.
It happens. Don't worry about it. Um, yeah,
I
it
think you
was
asked me
talking about
when
the
I go on
planning
a
and
trip.
yeah,
Okay.
well, where you go, but also how you plan for a trip.
Okay. So if I start my answer over, can you
That'll be
make it go
perfect.
from the
Yeah,
question? Okay.
yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I don't usually go that far. Once in a while, I will go on an international trip. But the way I prefer to do my photography is to go to places that I'm more familiar with. and that I've been before. So I mostly go to the states that border Nevada. So I have Utah, Arizona, California, Oregon, and Idaho. I haven't spent a lot of time in Idaho, but in the other ones, I've spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so it's usually like, between maybe 8-hour drive at the most. To Oregon, it's a little bit longer, and I love Oregon, so I go there a lot. But what I do is, in my list of my goals for my photos, I also have like what time of the year it would be best, or what I want to get in that photo as far as like flowers or fall colors, or, the season. And so when I have time to go on a trip, I'll kind of look at the weather for the next few days, because living in Nevada, it's really great. I can go in any direction and there's something different to shoot. So I'll kind of look at the weather and see where it looks best for what I've envisioned. And then I'll go in that direction, and I'll try and get some of those photos that I have on my list. So I could have ones some in the Eastern Sierra that I want to get, that's in California, that I want to get in summer, and some that I want to get in winter, and some that I want to get in fall. So if it's summer at the time, those will be the photos that go on my list, because it looks like it might be a good sunrise, and I want to get this spot at sunrise in summer. So I kind of have that all planned out in advance. And then, I go through all my options of, what might make a good photo. And then I look at the weather forecast and the conditions, and I decide which one I'm going to do the next day.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the way that, creating the art makes you feel. Is that a feeling that you get in the field, or is it a feeling that you get after you've completed everything and you're happy with the final output?
Both. It's totally both. So when I get the photo in the field that I think is going to meet my expectations, it feels great. And then when I get it on the computer and I edit it and I get the final thing, it feels even better. So, it's kind of both. And for me, it's actually not always only one photo. So, I will, sometimes blend exposures and, things like that. So, for those ones, the feeling comes more after it's been edited. But if I get the shot, like, I know it, like sometimes I get one that I don't know it till after I edit it, but there's those shots that you get and it in the field, and then the feeling is just great right then.
Cool. So getting into the field, get into the way you bring about your compositions, and the way that obviously not trying to get into all of the details of one particular photo or anything, but in general, what are you looking for, and how are you working your way through the landscape when you get into the field? Because obviously you've got a bit of a picture about what it is that you've got in mind. It might be a lake with a mountain behind it, and you're getting a reflection. So how are you then sorting out, where do I stand, where do I set up, etc.? What is it that you're kind of doing to bring about the compositions that you're putting together?
Right. Well, I do hike a little bit, but I'm not like a big backcountry, like backpacking type.
Oh.
So, probably like a mile and a half, one way would be the furthest I've hiked. So most of these places I've been to before. So like, for example, there's one location where I really like near far compositions. Those are my favorite, where I find something in the foreground and something in the background. And I find those particularly challenging. And I think that's why I like them, because not only do you have to find a nice organized pattern or something, in the foreground, but it has to support whatever you find in the
Yeah.
background. And
Yeah.
so it really adds another level of complexity and challenge to the photography, which I really enjoy a challenge. So I
Yeah.
think that's why I enjoy it so much. So like there's one place in particular where, I know there might be mud cracks there.
Yeah.
And so I might want to photograph the mud cracks with this butte in the background, but they're only there sometimes, like they're not always there. So if I decided to go to that area on my trip, I'll go check to see if there's any there.
Sure.
And then I know whether that's something I could even consider. And it's a pretty big area. So, I spend a few hours walking around and looking, and there might be mud cracks, but not ones that I find particularly compelling, or there might not be any, or they might have too many rocks jumbled into them and then I can't shoot it. So
Hmm.
I'll go check all the places, and maybe even some new places that I haven't been before, so I can add that to my list. Um, and then if I find something that I think is compelling, I wait for the right conditions
Yeah.
to be able to shoot it. Um, so another example is there's this shot in Utah with a butte, and there's like this tree branch that I really like. And I'm so surprised it's been there for like more than a year. Every
Right.
time I go there, it's exactly the same, but I
Yeah.
haven't gotten the conditions that I want to shoot
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So, like, I have this shot in my head, and it's a shot that I want, and hopefully the tree branch doesn't disappear before I get it. But it's that kind of thing. Then sometimes I'll go somewhere and it'll be completely different, than it was when I was there
Mm.
before. So then I'll kind of search for something new, that I can shoot there as a foreground.
Yeah.
So it really, depends on the situation, but I always like to find, if it's something I've shot before and I've gotten the conditions that I really like, then the next time I'll try and find something new,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
will be another compelling composition that I'll like.
Yeah. Cool. What are you trying to communicate with your photography?
I think for me, well, first, it's the beauty of our Earth and the universe. But,
Hmm.
I think every landscape photographer could say that. And so for me, I think it's become more of communicating the story of these friends. So it's like, I visit the same landscapes over and over and over, and they've become like old friends to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if it's a place I haven't been, now it's a new friend, and I'll probably keep going back there and getting to know it better. So it's kind of telling the story of these, many friends that I've gathered, these landscapes.
I really like that analogy. That's fantastic. That's cool. How would you describe your style to somebody that's never seen your work?
I usually describe it as dreamy but realistic.
Mhm.
So I like if somebody would look at my photo and then they would go to the place, they should be able to recognize it. I don't want to change it so much through my editing process that they wouldn't be able to recognize it. Yet I
Yeah.
kind of like to give it like a dreamy, otherworldly feel.
Hmm.
So, they wouldn't go there and it wouldn't have the feeling exactly that my photos have, because I like them to be colorful and I guess it's that otherworldly feel, but they should be able to recognize it. So I
Yeah.
say dreamy yet realistic.
Yeah. Cool. How do you think that's developed over time from where you sort of started out doing more snapshot documentary sort of stuff into that dreamy? How have you, when you look back across your older portfolio, how do you see that developing? And when was that sort of, when did the genesis, I guess, of that dreamy look come into things?
Right. I really think it's only been the past few years, maybe like 4 years. I think
Mhm.
it's when I really started focusing on doing photography full time, maybe a little bit before that. But of course, it was gradual over time. And, I'm just really attracted to like dramatic skies, whether it's a stormy sky or a sunset or sunrise or clouds, anything dramatic in the sky. And so I think that helped to lead to this dreamy feel because, these would be the photos that I felt like I got it. This is the photo I love because I got the landscape with a dramatic sky that complemented it.
Sure.
And so that led to kind of a colorful and helped me to achieve that dreamy feel.
Mm-hmm. In terms of where that style is going, are you trying to extend, or are you comfortable with where you're at? Is it something that you're experimenting with?
Well, I would say that I like where I'm at, but I always am trying to push myself. So
Mhm.
one thing is for a long time, I was mainly only doing, sunrise and sunset and
Yep.
astro. And now I've found myself more drawn to like stormy skies and
Yeah, yeah.
rainbows and things like that. So that's something kind of new for me. But it really does go into my whole style that I already have. It just extends it a little and it's helping me grow. And it's hard. I mean,
Mm.
I think it's harder to get good photos in those conditions because not only do you need the stormy sky, I think, but you also need the light. So you're
Yeah,
only going to get it like on the edge of a storm.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
your
yeah,
flat
it's
grey
yet another
overcast isn't going to
challenge.
cut it.
Right. So it's another challenge,
Yeah,
to try and get that also. So I still love the sunsets and sunrises.
yeah, yeah.
But here's a new thing now that I'm, exploring and trying to capture. And so I'm sure after this, there'll be something else as well.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the lifestyle choice. Obviously moving to Las Vegas, and as you said, part of the deal was you got to go full time. Um, how is that sort of shaping in terms of building that into a business? I'm assuming that's what you're trying to do with it, or is it still you know um, more on the amateur side of things? And by amateur, I don't mean in terms of the quality of the work. I mean in terms of the whether or not you're getting paid for it.
Right. So the first few years, I was definitely just trying to improve and build my portfolio. And since it's only been about 5 years that I've been doing it full time, that means it's only been a couple years that I've been building the business. And so what I have done, I thought I would do workshops like a lot of people do workshops. Um, and I have been doing private, like one-on-one
Mm-hmm.
workshops, and I really do enjoy doing those. So I mostly do them in Death Valley because I have the permit to do it there.
Yeah.
And also in a couple parts of Utah, I have a permit for it as well. And so I have been doing private workshops and I really enjoy doing that. But I think probably the group workshops isn't for me. I tried doing
Yeah.
that a couple times and I think I just prefer the one-on-one where I can give the person full attention
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also that it's kind of a shorter time period, like just one sunset or astro or sunrise, versus like, a long group workshop.
Mm.
Um, I've also been selling prints, and then recently I've been selling NFTs. So that's
Sure.
another way that I've been able to monetize
Yeah. Okay.
my photography.
How obviously people want to know, how's it going? Is it are you finding success, or is it still something that you're growing?
I'm still growing it.
Yeah.
Probably I'd say, at this point I'm like breaking even
Yep.
money
Yep.
wise. But I mean, that's to be expected the first couple of years of running a
Sure.
business. So
Sure. Not
I'm
many not many
definitely
businesses make money in year one.
right. So I'm definitely still, I feel successful.
Yeah. one of the things that everybody wants to know, and I'm not asking for specific numbers here, but how do you price your work? What goes into the thinking around your pricing, both for your workshops, but also for the prints and NFT sales?
Right. Well, for the workshops, I think I'm pricing it a little bit on the low side still, because I feel like, I'm just getting started. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not as big a name, but I do have a lot of valuable things to teach. And so I think that people who take workshops from me can really get a good deal,
Yeah.
because I think my pricing is very fair. And the places that I teach the workshops, I know so well. So if their goal is like to go to Death Valley, they've never been there before, and they just want someone who can, show them the best places to shoot, that's one option. But I really do enjoy the teaching.
Mm.
So, I mean, I want to help them find the composition, that if that's what they want to learn. So it really is up to the person. But I think that, the price, I priced my workshops a little bit lower, but not, like
Yeah,
way
yeah,
undercutting,
you're
just
not discounting.
because,
Yeah.
right. Just because I'm getting started. And so, then the prices will go up,
Sure.
as I do it more. And then for the prints, I just took the, the prices that SmugMug gave me, and it's been going well. So I'll just keep going with it.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And for the NFTs, I try and price them similarly to the prints, except that I can only sell each photo once
Yeah.
usually. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit higher, than it would be for a print that I could sell, many of
Yeah.
them.
So yeah, most photographers, particularly doing this on their own, the struggle is being not only the content producer, so you've got the production line of new content to create, you've got then the production line of marketing to create. How do you juggle all of the balls that end up in the air when you I guess trying to run it as a business?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I'm not a very good marketer. So that's something I'm working on. I've been reading books and, trying to learn more about how to do that. But luckily, I've grown a pretty good Instagram. So that's what I've gotten most of my workshop clients from.
Okay, cool.
And now on Twitter, I've gotten a few from there. Like I'm actually doing a workshop tomorrow in Red Rock Canyon. Well, not in Red Rock Canyon because I don't have a permit for it, but
Yeah.
near Red Rock Canyon. I like to follow the rules, so but near Red Rock Canyon, and that was someone from Twitter who is just beginning with their camera. So I'm going to
Yeah,
teach
yeah,
them,
yeah.
how to use the camera and stuff. So it's been a little slow, I think, because I don't have those marketing skills.
Mhm.
But I'm learning and I think I'm doing better and it's picking up a little bit.
Yeah, excellent. Good to hear. What, I guess, could somebody expect in one of your workshops in a one-on-one? What are you offering, and what are they going to experience when they're with you?
Right. So, everything from like going to a location that, would lend itself to photography if they don't know
Mhm.
the area, to, finding a compelling composition. And, I'll let them try to find it and we'll talk about it and, work together to find a composition. And it really depends, like if we're shooting into the sun, then I can teach them what bracketing, like how I do that, to get more dynamic skies. And even, I've done a lot of online workshops during COVID where I would teach them
Okay.
how I plan and how I use the apps to look at the weather.
Yep.
And that's something I love doing.
Mm.
Planning is actually one of my favorite parts, and I really enjoy teaching that. And then, I do astro as well. So, how to focus on the star, what settings to use. I don't really teach tracking yet because I'm just getting into tracking, but
Yep.
I teach how to get full detail in your foreground landscape when you're doing astro. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you could use a blue hour blend, or you could do a really long exposure at night, which is what I prefer to do to get the light from the stars. Although it kind of depends on what my subject is, which I do. But in astro, I would teach all of that. And then, if they want, we can do an online session afterwards to put it together and do the editing. So, I really talk to the person and, figure out what it is that they want. If they're more of a beginner, maybe they just want to learn, how to use their camera and the exposure triangle, and those kind of things. But it's been more people who know how to use their camera, but they want to take that next step, are most of the people I've had for workshops.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Where you live sounds like influences where you shoot to a certain degree. One of the things I'm really interested in is that link between location, opportunity as well, but also technique. And do you find that where you live and where you go to shoot influences how you shoot?
Oh, it definitely does. I mean, the desert probably wouldn't be my favorite location to shoot if I didn't live where I do. But
Sure.
like I said, the more I get to know a place like an old friend, the more I fall in love with it and the better photos I think I can get of it. But if I'm in the desert, I'm going to be looking for completely different things than if I'm shooting a seascape.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
in the desert, if I have great clouds, I might do a long exposure for the clouds, and I'm probably going to have to focus stack because I'm going to get really close to those mud cracks or that cactus or whatever it is that I'm using as a foreground element. But then if I'm at the sea, at the ocean, I'm not going to be focus stacking because you've got waves coming in and currents of water, and I'm going to be using maybe like half a second exposure, to get the lines in the water. Whereas if I'm somewhere in the mountains at a lake, then I'm going to use a different technique because I'm going to want to use a longer exposure to smooth the lake and enhance the reflections. So it really depends on where I am. And where I live, I have all of those things within a 5-hour drive. I can go to the desert, I can go to the mountains, I can go to the ocean. So, that's one reason I love living in Vegas for landscape photography is there's so many options and I get to use all those different techniques depending on where I'm shooting.
Yeah, great. You mentioned, the old friends that you've sort of gained from these locations. Is there any one particular one that just keeps drawing you back? And if so, why?
Yeah, well, there's actually two that I'll mention to you. The first is Death Valley National Park, and the main reason for that is because I live close to it. It's only a 2-hour drive away, so I don't go during the summer; it's too hot for me. But probably starting in October, I'm dying to get back there. I'm like, starting in October, it should start cooling off a little bit. But the thing I love about it, and it's kind of funny because the first time I went to Death Valley, I did not think it was beautiful at all. I was just like, what is this? But the more I go there, the more I love it. And what I love about it is that it's always changing. Like, it's probably one of the places that changes the most. We've had a particularly bad couple of years because there hasn't been any rain. So it's been kind of the same and it's been kind of corroded, like, things just aren't very pristine and nice. But there was a ton of rain there this summer. So I'm dying to get back there in October and see how things look. I've got a huge list of places that I need to check out and see how do they look after these storms. So I'm so excited about that. And that's one thing that makes me love photographing there is that I never know what to expect. expect, even at a place that I've been to 10, 20 times before. I never know what's going to be there. And I love that. And then the other location that is my favorite, and it's the furthest one I go to regularly, is the Oregon coast and the southern Oregon coast.
Okay.
And I have to go there at least twice a year, maybe more, as
Yeah.
much as I can get there, because not only do I love photographing there, I just love being there.
Yeah.
Like, if I could move somewhere and live in one place, that is where I would live.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question, is that if you could retire anywhere that you've shot, where would it be? Sounds like we found it.
Yeah, so it would be the Southern Oregon coast for sure. And the other great thing about there is that you can also get to the mountains in Oregon. And so, I prefer the coast there, which is interesting because I was brought into photography with mountains. But now I actually kind of prefer shooting on the coast over the mountains. And I think it's because, the waves are always changing and you can always find a way to make the waves into a new composition, and the flows of the water. And then it's also the challenge, like, the Oregon coast, the marine layer is coming in all the time. So getting good conditions is hard, but when you get it, it's just that great feeling.
Yeah, great. What's the most memorable experience you've had while taking photos?
You mean like one specific shoot that's memorable to me?
Sure. Or,
Okay.
could
I
be a
have
horror
one.
story, could be the most amazing thing
So,
you've ever seen, could be
and
anything.
it's not a particularly tough location to get to, but it actually ended up being my favorite photo that I've taken until now, and it's at Pfeiffer Beach on the California coast, in Big Sur. And all the photographers in this area know that if you go like 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after the winter equinox, between 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after, you can get the sun shining through the keyhole in the arch that's there. And so, I had tried so many times to go there. And, one thing that I'm always looking for is to get something that's uniquely my style. Like, I don't want to go there and be in a line with 20 other photographers far back from the arch, taking a photo, because I'm not going to be able to get the photo that's the one that I feel like is really my photo and really unique to
It's
me
also
and the way
never
I've
fun.
envisioned it.
It's also never fun jostling your tripod like legs over one another as well,
Right. And so most times when I've gone there during that time, it's been like that, like so many people there, and you just can't get the photo that you want. And so this one time I was going with my family, because we were going to go for Christmas and visit some friends who live near San Francisco. And to get there, we decided to drive up the coast. And this was after I had tried many times to photograph this phenomenon. And like I said, there were always all these people. So while we were driving, it was raining, pouring rain, a huge storm the whole time. And that's a little iffy in that area because they have landslides and, a lot of times the road gets ruined and stuff. So it was kind of a fun adventure with the family, to be driving through this big storm in Big Sur. And then we get there, and I didn't know this, but apparently the road that goes to that beach is known that it floods. Like if there's a big storm, it'll flood. And so we got, partway down the road, and the road was completely flooded. But luckily we have a truck that has very high clearance, and another truck had actually just gone through before us. So we just drove through the flood. And there was hardly anyone on the beach. There were a few other people there, but I was the only photographer. And just as I started shooting, the clouds started clearing and the sun came out, and it was like one of the, like when a storm is just clearing and you get that perfect light. And for a while, I didn't think I would get enough sun to get it through the middle of the keyhole. But just in time, the sun came through and I got the shot. And just everything about it was magical, that I was the only person there. The tide was exactly right, that I could get it wrapping around the waves. And, I had wrapping around the rocks, I mean. And, I had planned that it would be the right tide when I got there. And also I had seen on the weather that it looked like the storm might be clearing right around sunset. But when it actually turns out and comes together, it's like I said, it's just that great feeling.
So moving from there, the most wonderful experience you've had, what about some horror stories? Everyone has them.
Well, I try not to remember them.
Can't say I blame you.
This one is hard for me. I mean, there's so many times that I don't get the photo and it doesn't work out, or I, almost get hit by lightning, or, I don't know, but I just can't think of a specific,
that's okay. No problem
horror story to tell you. Well, actually, I do have one. Actually, I am thinking of one now. Right. So, this is this is when I went to North Lake in the Eastern Sierras, and it actually wasn't that long ago. And I actually did get great conditions, like the conditions exactly that I wanted. But right before I was going to get the shot, my camera fell off the tripod.
Ouch.
And landed in the lake. So, and at that time, I only had one camera. Now I have two in case something like that happens. So that was not a fun time at all. No. The camera didn't work and I didn't get the shot.
It didn't survive?
No.
Oh, no. What about
I did have insurance, so that was fine. But I wasn't able to get the shot and I had to cut the trip short because I didn't have a camera. So
never fun when you lose a camera.
Right. I mean, that's one reason now I carry two. Oh, actually, I have another interesting story I should tell you. That's a horror story. The most recent time I went to the Himalayas, I had my Really Right Stuff tripod and I kept it with me. We were in this big van, kind of like a bus, because I was with other photographers. And I kept the tripod with me most of the time, but then someone said, oh, you should put the tripod up above so that we have more space, down here where we're sitting. Yep. And, for some reason, I kind of knew that wasn't a good idea, but I put it up there anyway. And then when we got to the first location, I mean, I had gone all the way to India and I only had one tripod. The ball head, it's kind of an interesting ball head. It has all these washers inside it and a screw that holds them in place. The screw fell out.
Oh, no.
All these washers were all over the bus. And my ball head didn't work at all. And like, we're in the Himalayas, you can't get another ball head. Nobody has, a spare one that they can give me. And so we ended up searching the whole bus. We found all these washers. We figured out how to put it back together. And it just didn't quite work. Like, it just wouldn't get tight enough. So we searched one more time. There was one washer missing.
Wow.
Put that one in, totally fixed, and it worked. And my trip was saved.
One of the things, you talked about the Big Sur experience and, loads of photographers being there. Over the time that you've been taking photos, have you noticed a difference or a change in the volume of traffic in some of these locations?
Let's see. I have. Actually, the place that's actually most noticeable to me is Arches National Park. I mean, national parks are always busy, but it's one of the places where I had gone a lot when I first started taking photos, and it wasn't nearly as busy. That was like 15, 20 years ago. Before I was really taking great photos, but I just really liked to go there and take photos. but it definitely wasn't as busy as it is now. I think most places I feel that way about, but a lot of them I didn't start going to until like the past 5 years. So I haven't really seen as much of a difference, but
Yeah.
that one for sure. I feel like it's a lot more photographers.
And what about I guess I've heard stories from other photographers about sort of detrimental effects the volume of people, hitting some of these locations is having, where, there's erosion or there's litter or whatever. Have you experienced much of that in your travels?
Yeah, I mean, I have. There's places that I like to photograph, particularly like the mud cracks and things like that that have just kind of gotten destroyed,
Mm.
over time. But luckily they get refreshed and then I find new ones, and that's fine. But I definitely have seen things like that. And the mud cracks aren't like, I mean, I don't feel that bad about them getting destroyed because they will get refreshed. It's not
Sure.
like flowers, if they trample on them, they may never grow again.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing that's particularly saddening is, I don't think that's a word, that's particularly sad is there's an area in Utah where there used to be these beautiful flowers, and then they opened it up to ATV travel.
Oh,
So now
wow.
there's not any flowers there. So, that kind of thing is sad. And,
Yeah,
you feel like, um, it's kind of a shame, but things happen.
yeah, definitely. What have you learned about the world through photography?
I mean, I think I've definitely become much more observant and detail oriented, as far as, with, learning to look for compositions and to pay attention to the little details. And so I think that's carried over to my life in general. I'm definitely much more observant than I used to be. Um, and also, I think it's given me more patience, like,
Okay.
the patience to keep trying and to wait
Mm.
for the conditions to become just right,
Yep.
is definitely something that photography has instilled in me. And then it's also pushed me out of my comfort zone. Like, there's things that I've done for photography that I probably wouldn't have done if it weren't
Okay.
for it. Like hiking further than I would, or
Yeah. Yeah.
going deeper in the waves up on the rock than I
Yep.
otherwise would have. Things that can sometimes scare me a little bit,
Sure.
um, it's kind of good, I think, to get it outside of your comfort zone sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I think stepping outside your comfort zone's an important part of growth, and it certainly helps. I know it helps me, in terms of going places. I climbed up a. It's not. We don't have mountains like you guys do, so but I climbed up a mountain the other day actually, and it was only about 600 odd meters, but it was very steep, so it was something that took a bit of effort, but the views at the top well worth it, and that's the thing.
Right.
You kind of got to get out of that, you know, taking the easy route or just going to somewhere that's always familiar to you to get out there and extend yourself, I think.
Yeah, and then the other thing, like camping, I had never really camped, and
Mm.
definitely not alone, until I started doing photography. So just a lot of things that, it's really motivated me to do that I otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah, sure, sure. um Talking a bit, you talked a bit about the process in the fields and setting up. You've got the shot. Let's talk a little bit about processing. I don't want all of your processing secrets or anything, but are you the type of photographer that gets home, gets straight onto the computer and starts editing, or do you let it sort of gestate for a while before you get into it?
I let it gestate for a while, and it's not always intentional, but I just
Yeah.
have so many things to do that sometimes it takes me a while to get around to edit it. And then also, I kind of have in my mind what I want in the end, but
Mhm.
sometimes I end up starting over a few times.
Yep.
So that makes it take even longer, for me to get to a final photo.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you doing in terms of processing? Obviously, you mentioned focus stacking, and are you doing multiple layers, lots of composites, lots of work in Photoshop, or is it largely in Lightroom, or a combination of the two?
So the more I get into editing, the less I use Lightroom. I mainly just use Lightroom, to organize the photos,
Hmm.
and, I adjust a few things at the beginning, but then I bring it into Photoshop and I do most of my editing there. And I wouldn't say I end up with a ton of layers, maybe like 10 to 20 would
Yeah.
be, a normal amount of layers that I would have. And it really depends on what I'm doing. Like, if I'm shooting into the sun, then I usually bracket 5 shots,
Yeah.
2 stops, and I'll blend those together. And so there'll be some layers for that. And then if I have the light on a mountain and then color in the sky, I might blend those. So there's some
Yeah.
more layers. And I do a little bit of like adding light and light glow to some of my photos, although not all.
Yep.
So that adds, some more layers. Um, and for the Astro, I always have one, well, actually, at least 20 for the sky that I stack to reduce noise.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then, but I use Starry Landscape Stacker for that. So that's not in
Right.
Photoshop.
Okay.
And then I'll have, maybe 1 to 5 long exposures, like 5 to 7 minute exposures to get the light from the stars for the landscape. So I have to blend all of that. And then
Yeah.
if I really want something in the foreground, that I'm close to, then I'll also sometimes even blend in Blue Hour for that, because it's really hard to focus stack when you're doing a 5 to 7 minute exposure
Yep.
to get enough light from the stars.
Yeah. Yep.
So, the Astro, I think, can often have more layers and take a little longer than my other photos.
Yeah, processing Astro's a dark art in and of itself, I think, as opposed to just your normal blending, etc. But
Right.
I mean, I do know people that try to get as much as they can. They've got a sensor that can handle high ISO really well, and that sort of thing. Try and get it all in one, but it's a big ask, I think, of a lot of equipment, even today's world.
Right. And I think some people, might light it up like with the low level lighting and that
Yep.
kind of stuff. But for me, I just like the more natural look
Sure.
of,
Sure.
getting the light from the stars. That's my preferred way to do
Mm.
it. And I particularly like to have water in my photos. So, I like to get the reflection of the stars, or
Yeah.
at least the color from the reflection if the water's not still,
Yeah.
or even just kind of a light glow from the reflection. And I find that actually capturing that um, leads to a much more natural look. So I
Mm.
like to capture it, but I'll do maybe a longer exposure for the reflection. And
Yeah.
so then I'll have to blend those, in post.
Sure, sure. So how long are you spending in post? Do hour, 3 hours?
It really depends on the photo, but some
Sure.
of them I would
I mean,
say
Astro is obviously going to be a little bit longer, but
some I would say take much more than that, because I would say on average maybe it's 3 to 4 hours, but
yeah,
then sometimes I start over many times because
yeah,
it
right,
just doesn't, it's not at all what I had thought I wanted. And so I need to start again. So then, it ends up taking a lot longer, or, I'll go back and look at it the next day and I'll be like, well, I just need to change this. And then that ends up another 3 hours. So, it can end up taking quite a while.
Yeah, definitely. No, I know exactly what you mean. Do you sort of get to a point in your editing and then park it and come back to it with fresh eyes, or do you sort of try and do it all in one extended, editing session?
I mean, I try to get to what I like as a final photo in one session, but then I'll always look at it again, like the next day. And like I was saying, sometimes I'll decide that it needs more editing or that I need to start over, but sometimes I'll like it just the way it is. And then that's the end of it.
Yeah,
So.
cool. Do you print any of your work yourself, or do you use a service?
I've been using Bay Photo, which is in the San Francisco area, but I'm thinking I might switch to Nevada art printers because they're in Las Vegas. So I keep meaning to go over there and, talk to them, but I haven't gotten around to it. But no, I don't really print it myself. I use the services.
Cool. Have you ever hit a creative wall?
Oh, yes. It happened to me after the pandemic. So, in March of the pandemic, everything kind of shut down and I didn't go out and shoot. And I was dying to get out again and shoot. And then finally in May, I went with my kids when they were done with school and we went for the whole summer and I didn't take any photos. And I'm like, I totally wanted to get out and shoot. And it was just like, I don't know, I couldn't get back into it. And that was when the comet, I'm blanking on the name, that was when the comet was there. And so I missed out on the comet. And Neowise. And I had all these opportunities. I could have gotten like a great shot, a great landscape with the comet. And it was that creative block. Like I just couldn't get back into it. So then finally, I had a workshop that I was going to take with Mark Adamus. And it had been postponed, a bunch of times because of the pandemic. And then finally I took that workshop. And so I was forced to just, start taking photos again. And then I snapped out of it and I was back into it. And I think now I know when I go through those creative blocks, I just have to force myself to go out and take photos and then it'll just come back. I'll just get over it. Yeah. So I haven't really had another one since then, but.
Cool. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing photographers right now?
I think it's getting your work seen. Like I said, I'm not good at marketing and I don't know, maybe some are really good at it. But for me, I'd say that's, a big challenge is being able to market yourself and get your work seen and get yourself out there. There's a lot of photographers. It's a, competitive marketplace. So
definitely,
I think that would be it.
Okay. What do you see as the future of photography?
I think cameras are just getting better and better and better. And so we're really going to be able to do so much more with photography. Like maybe I will be able to get what I consider high quality astro in a single photo someday because cameras will be so great. So I think there's a bright future. I mean, some people would say, oh, well, the cameras on phones are getting better, so everyone's going to be taking photos. But I kind of see it the other way around. Like, in order to really create great photos, you need to be intentional about it, no matter how good your camera is. Totally. So I think by having better cameras, it's going to give us even more opportunities to capture even better things that we couldn't even dream of capturing before.
Where do you see the place of AI in photography? There's a lot of hype around the ability to chuck a few words at a computer and it generates an image. And I've seen people doing combinations of photography and AI. Do you see threats from that in any way?
I don't really see it as a threat. I see it as another art form, kind of like, I think painters kind of were scared of photography,
Sure.
but a painting is different from a
Yep.
photograph. And so I think it's the same way with AI. It's just another art form that, is coming around, but I don't think it will, make photography less or not as good. There's always space for new art forms.
Mm, mm. I, I I agree to a certain extent. I think probably in the realm of some of the commercial photography, I think there's risks there for commercial photographers. So, let's say, a large cola manufacturer, for example, wants some product shots. They could just say, all right, a green can with a certain logo, etc., and produce their own, lit a certain way, produce their own work without referring to a photographer. They could just type some words in, and the computer may spit some stuff out for them. But I think beyond that, I don't see it impacting. And I agree with you in terms of particularly landscapes. I think there'll be some very interesting mixes and blends of the two art forms. It'll be an interesting space to watch, though.
Yeah, yeah, it will be. And I see what you're saying about like product photography and things like that. But yeah, as far as like as an art form, I think that there's space for both. But yes, in
Yeah, I
commercial
think the human
photography.
element in
Yeah.
the art form is never going to disappear. Human creativity is going to continue regardless of what happens, unless our robot overlords come and crush the species, which I think is a possibility too. But that might be a little way off. Hopefully, if you weren't a photographer, what would you be?
Um, I'd probably just still be a computer programmer, which is what I did before I started photography.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, I liked doing that as well. So,
Yeah. And what do you like to do when you're not shooting or creating?
um, well, I mean, a lot of my time is taken up by, planning my photos and thinking about what I want to photograph.
Mm.
But in other time, I like to hang out with my family. I have two daughters and a husband, and my dogs. I have two dogs.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, my favorite is to hang out with them and go on a trip
Nice.
photographing so that I can have the best of both worlds, but I can't always do that. I like current events. I watch the news, and I like to read, listen to music.
Hmm.
So yeah, I have a lot of things I like to do. I don't really watch TV or anything like that. I try to, I mean, except for the news, I
Sure.
try and focus it on other things. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I like to eat. Food is probably one of my favorite things, especially at nice restaurants. So yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. We've all got our inspirational photographers out there. Who do you have that's inspiring you at the moment that you think I should be talking to?
Okay. Well, one of my biggest inspirations is Mark Adamus. I
Sure.
mentioned that I did a workshop with him, and I think maybe have you already spoken to him?
No, not yet. Oh,
Oh,
he's
okay.
on my list.
Okay. So my style is very different from his. I mean, there's some similarities, but just he's very inspirational and he's a great teacher. So a lot of what I've learned from him. So he's a big inspiration. And then I also really love Michael Shainblum's
Mhm.
photography. Um, his is a huge inspiration for my
Yeah,
photography.
fantastic.
And he's does more time lapses now as
Yeah,
well, which is also an interesting aspect.
definitely.
So right now, those are probably the two who have been inspiring and influencing me the most.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for that. I've got one more question for you, and for many of my listeners, it's the most important one I can ask you. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Um, I don't order it, but if I were hungry and that were the only pizza, I would eat it.
I'm with you on that. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to me today, Arwin. It's been really wonderful getting to know you a little bit better and learning more about what you do. Where can people find your work?
Okay, well, I have my website, which is photographybyarwin.com, and that's where I sell my prints. But if you want the overview of all of my photos, Instagram is the best place to look, which is arwin.l. And the reason is because I put more photos on there than
Oh,
anywhere else. It's only some of those that make it as a print to my website. And then if you want to see like my latest work, you can, follow me on Twitter because I tweet a lot of my latest work there.
yeah,
But Twitter I mean, it's easier to see it in a gallery format on Instagram.
definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
All right. Thank you very much.
thank you. This was great.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.